Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. We are always impressed when any wealthy country gives foreign aid. And foreign aid is not something bad. As a matter of fact, Europe came up quite advanced because of the foreign aid given by USA. When President Truman came up with the concept of Marshall Plan, the purpose was to enable Europe to come up. But the noble cause is often infected, tainted, supposedly given for the humanitarian purposes. The reality of the foreign aid is very different. It is given to exploit, given for selfish purposes, and many times foreign aid is given with ulterior purposes, as China does. They used to say that flag follows the trade. Yes, but now flag also follows the foreign aid. And the purpose is to keep a country under your influence, under your control. And that is why Mrs. Gandhi absorbed foreign aid, PL 480 was just thrown in the waste paper basket. And India lost millions of dollars, but then they didn't bother at that time. I would say that foreign aid is in fact a curse for the country which gives it because it reveals the naked variousness and covetousness of that country and the country which you receive. When you receive foreign aid, then your urge to do yourself to progress is diminished, is curtailed. I always say that foreign aid is something which is cumbersome. And many a times it curbs the initiative, the entrepreneurial skills, and so on. Basically, foreign aid is never intended to bring about real or lasting change. They don't want real change. They want you to remain poor. They want you to remain underdeveloped. They want you to remain subjugated. Foreign aid refers to voluntary transfer of financial capital, goods, or services via specific projects, programs, or relief operations from one country or international organization for the benefit of the recipient country or its population. And now these international organizations are more often than not a mouthpiece for the intelligence agencies. 80% of the US international agencies, which are called to be charitable organizations, are in fact doing the work, the dirty work of CIA. 100% of the Chinese are members of the CCP, the Communist Party of China, and are obliged under law to collect information and give it to the country. So, the foreign aid, which can take the form of economic, military, or humanitarian assistance, can be bilateral from government to government or multilateral when they give not through the government but through international agencies. So, the like Plan International. Now, OECD classified foreign aid as official development assistance, which is defined as flow of development assistance provided by the state and the local government or by the executive agencies like USA to developing countries, supposedly for promoting sustainable economic development and welfare. Now, if we see the statistics, we'll find that USA arguably the only superpower left and gives almost $300 billion in foreign aid. That is last year. And most of the aid went where? To Middle East and sub-Saharan countries. Nothing wrong with that. But has the fundamentalism decreased in Middle East? Have the sub-Saharan countries, despite all this aid, come out of their abject poverty? Has the gender solution or the gender disparity disappeared? Are the human rights being observed in these countries? None of the avowed object has, has been realized. And as I was saying, this aid is possibly out of this aid, one aid, which is the food aid, is possibly the biggest humanitarian, again, supposedly humanitarian organization. And it was operating in Peru and education for commercial sex purposes in Ethiopia. Now imagine this concept of commercial sex workers. Are they promoting that or are they making it an appropriate profession? Every dollar in US was paid by the US taxpayer who is impatient. He doesn't want that. If it's surveys done, you would find that at least 70% of Americans hate this, and rightly so. Now, some of the frustration comes with, we have seen the latest debacle in Afghanistan. 20 years back, the experts had predicted that US efforts to transform Afghanistan would fail. And till today, they have failed. Agreed, there has been some progress. Look at India. India invested $3 billion. All that has gone waste. The projects have been suspended. Hundreds of millions thrown at NGOs, projects, workshops did not do what they were intended to do. And 80% of the foreign aid is wasted in the so-called administrative purposes. But because USA was trying to show a great idea liberal democracy was for anyone, it focused on funding projects that would look good to those who already lived in liberal practice. Now, democracy is not something which you can plant in a country. There are cultural traditions, there is a heritage, and that heritage may not like those institutions which USA seeks to promote. Now, what happened? Filmmaking programs, television, radio channels, seminars at hotels, on everything from human rights, women rights to legal transformation was touted, shouted from the rooftops, and nothing happened. In fact, these projects were all donor driven, geared towards making them Americans' nation building plan look good on paper. They looked very good. People were saying, wow, we are doing great. But it was all done on paper. Whether they really resulted in any long lasting changes, you can best see for yourself. Situation has not materially changed. As a matter of fact, as I said earlier, foreign aid is not meant to make any real change. The only change they want is to make you more dependent on you. There was a seminar organized and Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Harvard, who was also advisor to Kofi Annan at that time, was speaking. And then he and I got in a debate. He said, well, we are giving so much money to Africa and they are is interest free and they are not now the foreign donor countries are willing to forgive that. And I stood up and said, what do you mean by forgive? You mean to say you are giving a largest donation? What you have looted from that country, from that continent, you can't pay them back. As a matter of fact, this is not aid. This is an ointment you are applying to your soul. It is a guilt complex. And you want to show that you are benefactor. Really, you are not. India, about $3 trillion worth of Indian wealth was siphoned away by England. And if England gives a pittance of say a couple of $1 million, even $1 million. It can't even compensate what they had looted out of the country. In such being the case, foreign aid, well, there is a comment by Mr. Sanjay Paul, there's a problem with audio and video. At least on my side, it's okay, but I just can feel sorry. Coming back to the subject, USA leverages corrupt governments of most of the countries where it gives aid. And it's a road to becoming a superpower. And the road to superpower is lined with lot of aid money to leverage any part of the world. You know what USA was doing is being done by China now. They give billions and billions of dollars. Now, who are the biggest donors? USA, number one, Germany, UK, European Union, Japan, France, Italy, Sweden. USA gives, last year they gave 35.5 billion, Germany 25 billion, UK 18 billion, European Union 16 billion, Sweden 5 billion, Canada gave 6.4 billion, and India gave 1.32 billion. For example, now look at the recipients: Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Mali. Now, GDP, look at the contradiction. There's a comment by Sujit Sundaraj that is fine with audio. Thank you, Sujit. So I think Mr. Jaspal problem is with your reception. Anyway, coming back, the fact that the aid is given for the purposes is horrible. And the reality is that neither the giver nor the aid taker is benefiting. About a couple of years back, I was discussing with Chris Blackman, an economist, that one of the finest things that can be done to help lift the communities out of poverty in the long run is not to build a school or a well or a toilet. The best thing can be done is to break the cycle of poverty. You build up a school, what difference does it make? Break that cycle of the poverty, give the community members actual cash. Tell them to do it. That. Now, that being the case, we have found that the individuals rather than the aid agencies are the best outcome in deciding how the money is to be best utilized. As 80% of the money which is given in aid is used up by the agencies themselves. Their salary, their traveling, and they travel posh. They stay in five-star hotels. So all that money which is wasted, if it is given directly to the people, as I say, if you want to help man, don't give him fish. Tell him how to catch a fish. That's what it should be. Aid them to develop their facilities, their faculties, their capabilities, not give them charity. Aid agencies and donor governments, secondly, try to keep control of the money and the projects. Why? Because it places them in superior moral and intellectual positions. Another thing, when they give you aid, they specify, well, the machinery would be purchased from our country. Well, the consultancy would be by our country. So all that money is in fact coming back to them in one form or the other. For technology, they charge the money. For machinery, they charge the money. For consultancy, they charge the money. So all the money that's given either is used, 80% is used in the form of salaries and infrastructure, and 20% it comes back to them. But then they have a superior moral and intellectual position. The moral bit applies to the belief that if aid is given in cash to the poor farmer, the farmer will waste the money. How stupid. You are not having faith in that. They think that the farmer will waste the money and they spend it something that makes his family's life better. That's question. Problem is it's an intellectual So, condensation. They think they are superior to the people who receive it. The belief that the poor are stupid and they do not know what they need or what would be of real use to their community is a sign of conceit, pride, hubris. And that is really horrible. That is something highly objectionable. This is intellectual condensation, and that cannot be acceptable. And not all approaches to developing a profile as a global superpower are built on logic. In recent years, Chinese have been giving Pakistan a lot of money. Not only China, but and how has Pakistan gained as that? Rather, it has built an emphatic complex in Pakistan that they dare not say anything against China. They wanted to object to OGRs being imprisoned, but then they had to come out and say, no, this is an internal affair and those people must be back. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative makes no secret that it would serve Chinese interests. So instead of giving money to many governments involved in BRI, the Chinese created a scheme of structured debts, whereas the projects are expected to attract their own revenue. And what may make a novel approach is not the guarantee of those aids. Aid can be withdrawn if you object to it. Fair enough. Money makes a mayor go. And we know aid objects don't always work, especially when they're implemented on large scales. And that's the case with the Chinese plan. In particular, Chinese funded projects end up not being profitable, are being profitable only to the point where the aid can be repaid and the recipient governments find themselves where they were, rather deprived of all their credibility. So aid as the benevolence, as an image building exercise, or aid as a means to get poor countries to build things has few guarantees. The only granted winners are the donor countries, the agencies, the middlemen. Look at Canada and look at the aid and the leader situation. The Prime Minister at G7 pledged $400 million to education around the world. Another $180 million the Global Partnership for Education in Europe. What about the broken, messed up school system here in Canada itself? Education costs are skyrocketing for the Canadian youth and making university a mountain, a Mount Everest, which is very difficult to be climbed. He pledges $241 million to family planning programs around the world. And he gives it to who? 20 million donors to Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation. And he says, because they have integrity. And we have seen how much integrity Bill and Clinton Hillary Foundation has. And this all happened. On one side, he's giving $240 million. The same day, he said, we don't have money to give to the veterans who fought for the country. He pledges $2.65 billion to climate change. And then he bullies the provinces into new taxes to pay this pledge. He pledges $300 million for Rohingya refugees, while a refugee crisis of our own building, flooding into Quebec, he won't address. He pledges $125 billion to Caribbean reconstruction, and the infrastructure in Canada is falling apart. He gives $650 million for sexual and reproductive health in Haiti, and 63% of the women in Canada are without a family doctor. He pledges $50 million to Palestinians for flood relief, while New Brunswick has the worst flooding in that decade this spring. 840 million to Syria for humanitarian assistance, while the native reserves in Canada do not have clean drinking water. $10.5 million it gives to a convicted terrorist, but and $30 million to three other fellows who were wrongfully detained by a third country. A third country can arrest them and he pays them. But he refuses to give any money for the pipeline. So $10 billion he has given, and none of that stays in the country. Excuse me, is that being patriotic and nationalist? Or is it just humbug and hypocrisy? As a matter of fact, the whole concept of foreign aid is nothing but exploitation, and it is tantamount to economic slavery leading to political slavery. Shakespeare said, quality of mercy is not stained. It blesses who gives and blesses who takes. The same I can say. The quality of foreign aid is not stained. It curses the giver and destroys the recipient. And the sooner we put an end to this sham of foreign aid, the better it would be for the world. Because the poor countries would have initiative and take themselves up. And yet it Bangladesh is doing. So sooner we abolish this demon, the better it would be. Thank you.